This is manic.mercurian with your birth chart reading. This reading will be for Tuesday, December 19th, 2006 at 9:45 p.m. in Oceanside, California. So this means that you have Sun and Sagittarius, Moon in also Sagittarius with Virgo rising. Now, as soon as I read the date for your Sun's chart reading, I immediately was particularly interested. I'm always interested when I do readings, but when I saw the date, I thought it was very interesting because December 19th, I knew the Sun would be close to a conjunction with the galactic center. Sun is at 28 degrees Sagittarius. The galactic center is about 27 to 28 degrees Sagittarius. So this is very interesting because this is that same point in the sky that you have your South Node. This is that same point that you have that conjunction between South Node and Neptune is right around there. So this means that you and your Sun have a very special connection. And it also means that both of you have psychic abilities. At least that's what is suggested by these charts, these placements. His may be a little bit different than yours because it's not his South Node that's conjunct the galactic center, it's the Sun. But it's also very interesting that Pluto is very close to the galactic center as well, and so is the Moon to a lesser extent. So this does mean that he definitely has a strong potential for psychic abilities. Again, it's those vivid dreams. It could be really anything. Paranormal experiences as well. A lot of people report things having to do with extraterrestrials or visions of being in other lifetimes, other bodies, things of that nature. He is likely to have all of that as well. It's just different in how it may come to him. For him, it's the Sun that's there. So this is actually something that may be more learned. For you, it was innate. It was, there from day one. For him, it's hard for me to say. I mean, on the one hand, it's something that's kind of always there, but on the other hand, it looks more like something that will develop for him than it was for you, I think, if that makes sense. What else can I say? For him, though, it's also very interesting. Pluto is so close to there, so this is something that has to do with his generation. Many of his peers may be somewhat psychic as well, or have strange experiences. Some would say supernatural experiences, things of that nature. Also, and I say this next part with a little bit less confidence, but sometimes the Sun can represent the father. So Sun being on the galactic center could represent maybe his father having some kind of significance with these supernatural experiences or psychic phenomenon, things of that nature. But the Moon is close as well too, which represents the mother. So both are kind of in the picture here. Okay, but let's kind of step back just for a moment from this more like psychic galactic center type of stuff and talk about his chart a little bit more broadly. So easily the first place I think we should talk about is Sagittarius. He has a massive stellium in Sagittarius with many planets there: Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, Moon, Pluto, and the Sun. So really the majority of all the planets in general are in Sagittarius for him. So he would very much relate to the themes of Sagittarius, which I'm about to describe. But first, I do want to mention how for him, the way in his chart Sagittarius falls is in the 4th house. So this means that the way his Sagittarius themes will play out will be a little bit different than maybe the typical Sagittarius. So what I mean by that is Sagittarius is typically a sign that's very outgoing. It's completely focused on expansion of the mind and of the soul, of the heart. It wants to expand. It wants to experience everything. So it does that through obtaining large amounts of knowledge. But it also does that through firsthand experience, physical experiences as well. So that's where Sagittarius has everything to do with travel, but also with higher learning, spirituality, philosophy. Sagittarius is interested in anything that expands the heart and the mind and the soul. So this is where, typically Sagittarius is very outgoing, very outspoken, very blunt. It's one of the, I just did a poll on my channel and people say Sagittarius is one of the most honest signs. It's all about, let's just get out there, let's explore, let's have fun. It's very spontaneous. It can actually be a little bit on the reckless side, being a fire sign. Sagittarius is very intense, very passionate. It's very black and white. It's all or nothing, and it tends to be very active. What else? For your sun, though, it's a little bit different because, Sagittarius falls in the fourth house at the very base of the chart. So having individuals who have many planets in the fourth house tend to be homebodies. They tend to spend a lot of time at home because he has so many planets, which is very unusual to have so many planets in one part of the chart. He has so much activity all packed in fourth house Sagittarius. He may be traveling and exploring vicariously from home. That's what I would really kind of strongly speculate based on these placements. It looks like he may spend a lot of time at home. He may feel more comfortable there. People who have heavy fourth house energy like this, their home is where they feel the most comfortable, where they're the most confident, they're the most expressive. For him, you can break it down by planet there. He has Mars in Sagittarius, so that would be the most confident, the most ambitious at home. Mercury's there, so that it shows that that's where he'll do his best learning, his best communicating. Of course, generally speaking, there can always be exceptions, but Moon is there, so that shows that he's most, he feels safest, most comfortable at home, and then Sun is there. He can express himself the best, etc. It's everything is kind of focused on Sagittarius, so it's focused on expansion, but fourth house, so expansion from the home. I think especially these days, you can do a lot from your home. You can learn about the world from your home. You can learn anything. Sagittarius people are often interested in other languages or other customs, cultures, different ways of doing things. So although these themes seem very contradicting or incompatible, I think especially in today's society they actually can be compatible. You can experience the far reaches of the world from your own home, and that's kind of the dichotomy that I think is very ever present in his life here. What else can I talk about? It's interesting, and I don't know, not everything I say is 100% accurate in these readings. I do tend to get very favorable reviews, but sometimes I say things I'm not sure how it will actually play out, if that makes sense. But something that I've heard, which to me so far has tended to be accurate, is that if you're born with Sun in the fourth house, you tend to grow up with an absent father. The father, and that can be any type of way. It could be that he was literally just gone the whole time, or maybe he was working a lot, or he was absent. Sometimes parents can be absent with like mental issues, things like that. I don't want to speculate on exactly the condition of that absence, but Sun is in the fourth house, which could indicate an absent father, but Moon is in the fourth house as well, so that indicates an absent mother. That may not always be true, but that's just something I wanted to point out. And the reason for that is because when planets are in the fourth house, they're at the very base of the chart. So that means that when the person was born, all those planets, um, were as far away from the top of the sky as possible. So rather than shining down on that person when they were born, they were off elsewhere shining on another part of the world. So I think it may be very difficult to be born with a chart like this, where so many planets are at the bottom of the chart. I think he may never. Well, I don't want to say never, but it may be very, very difficult for him to feel comfortable in public, in the world, in the outer world. Um, like for example, if this chart were flipped and there was this huge stellium at the top of the sky, he would likely be a celebrity. A lot of celebrities have charts like this because they are most comfortable and they're the most powerful in the limelight. But here it's the opposite. I think that the top of the sky, which represents the outer world is the most dangerous, I would say. The least controlled, the least safe. Um, so I think it's how do I put this? Like, if you had all your planets at the top of the sky, you could feel comfortable at home, or maybe even more comfortable out in the world. It's harder to go the other way, because fourth house representing the home is the safer place, and it's the place that you have to be less strong to be in. If all your planets are in that space, and that's showing that that's all that you're accustomed to, that's what you're suited for, it's much more difficult to go the other direction and learn how to be comfortable in the outer world, where it's, I would say, objectively more dangerous. Does that make sense? So I do think it would be very difficult to have a chart like this, definitely emotionally, mentally, maybe even physically as well. I'm not sure. I know you mentioned that he has some like physical impairments. um, I wonder if this could be part of the reason. I'm not totally sure though. um, but but yeah, it does look like a very interesting way to have all these planets down there. It's definitely not all bad. It looks very difficult, I won't lie about that, but there can be advantages from this too. Whenever you have, planets all in one area of a chart, it does intensify the weaknesses or the challenges, but it also intensifies the strengths, because you're kind of putting all your cards on one. What's the saying? Like, you're putting all your eggs in one basket, or all your chips on one. I don't play poker, but something like that. You're investing all in one thing. So for him, I think there may be some very interesting strengths, not only with psychic abilities, but also with learning in general. I think, when you have planets in the fourth house, you are a little bit more passive or observant. And applying that to Sagittarius, which is all about learning about the world and expansion, he may be very, I would speculate he would have a very interesting outlook on things, an outlook that is active in the sense that it looks like he very much wants to understand everything. He's probably highly intelligent, but the combination of that passion for learning with that ability to be passive enough to observe as well, I think you kind of have gold when you have both of those. Being passive enough to observe as things are, but also passionate enough to seek that knowledge and really explore. So he may be he may accumulate like a very impressive amount of knowledge, I think, or also a very unique perception that could be very valuable. Let's see. And what else here could we talk about? He was born just before a new moon. It looks like the new moon would be, technically the next day after he was born. Um, this is also very interesting because being born at this part of the lunar cycle is one of the best times for boosting psychic abilities. And this is very interesting too. It's reminiscent of your chart, being born during a third quarter moon. That's also a window of very psychic abilities. But being born just before a new moon as well, this is he was born at the very last part of the lunar cycle. So this is almost kind of like how Pisces is in the zodiac. It's the last phase, the last moment of that moon cycle. So, especially considering that Sun was so close to the galactic center, and then Moon was as well. Um, how do I put this? This is also difficult because not only was the Sun at the, he was born near the middle of the night, basically, but also Moon was there as well. And even if the Moon had been, up high in the sky when he was born, there would be no light to it basically whatsoever, because it was so close to the Sun, it was so close to a new moon. So that's where, this would have been a very, literally very, very dark night, because no planets were in the sky at all, really. The stars would have been very bright though, the fixed stars. um, Saturn may have been visible once it, even, well, at this time though, Saturn wasn't even really visible because it had just risen above the eastern horizon. So it's just very interesting. There's a completely blank sky. Only the fixed stars would have been visible. um, but anyway, going back to the moon. So yeah, there would have been no moonlight there. So people who are born close to a new moon, rather than having like really heavy, like tangible emotions that are kind of in your face and simplistic, it's much more how do I put this, like, I don't want to say empty. On the one hand, it looks empty, but on the other hand, it's just that those emotions and that intuition are still there, but they're more subconscious in nature. They're more non-physical in nature. So that's where you get that connection, not only to the subconscious, but also to intention as well, intuition rather. Um, so that's where I think to those who are less aware, it may look like someone born with near a new moon is just devoid of emotion, but actually that's really couldn't be farther from the truth. It's just that those emotions are much deeper in the subconscious, um, and he's much more open as well. I think there's an openness that comes with these placements too. So far I keep landing on themes involving very difficult placements and a very difficult setup, but one that could be very valuable though. Like this almost strikes me as the chart of like a genius or a psychic, someone who has a very unique perspective, um, because he would just be so open to, I don't know, a different understanding. It's hard for me to even really pinpoint exactly. Um, okay, and then it's such an interesting chart to read because usually I'm kind of scanning around and I'm going here, I'm going there, to talk about different parts of the chart. But really, so much is focused on fourth house Sagittarius that there's not much else to talk about, at least in this part of the reading where I'm just kind of covering the basics. Let's talk about his ascendant. That's a major part. So that is, in a much different area. He does have Virgo rising. So this means, I think this is really interesting. This also kind of indicates a focus on learning too. All these Sagittarius placements are focused on learning, but so is Virgo. Both Virgo and Sagittarius are mutable signs, so they're focused on expansion, learning. They're very adaptable. They're very open. He also has South Node in Virgo too, so it's showing a huge focus on learning, obtaining information, reading, writing, and I think this is kind of perfect because Virgo rising and Virgo South Node, they go hand in hand with all these fourth house Sagittarius placements, because all of this involves learning in a way that is somewhat passive or indirect. Learning through books, television, documentaries, reading, writing, watching things from afar, kind of. He would be the astronomer, not the astronaut. That's a way that I've heard it put. And I'm not saying he can't be the astronaut. I don't want to limit someone, It's just that learning in a more active, hands-on type of way would not be as innate for him. It would be something that would be learned. And I would speculate that it would be something that would not be easy to learn. It would take time and effort. It just looks like he much more naturally, easily falls into the area of learning indirectly, if that makes sense. And that's what Virgo is all about. That's what Virgo rising and South Node are all about. These also show that he'd be responsible. He'd be very attentive to time management, things of that nature. Let's see. And I don't want to talk too much about the South Node because then we'll get more into past life things, and we'll talk about that in just a moment here. Excuse me. But I will say Virgo South Node and Virgo rising, they tend to make people very responsible. Even if you have no other Earth placements at all, looks like he only has Venus in Capricorn, but hypothetically speaking, even if you have no Earth placements whatsoever, just having that Virgo South Node, and in this case Virgo rising as well, these are powerful enough to make a person very responsible, very attentive to time, very detail oriented. They to me they relate to someone who takes care of themselves, especially physically. So someone who takes out the trash, goes to work. They're responsible basically. So that is a strong pattern as well. What else can I say? I think these Virgo energies really balance things nicely because on the one hand they strengthen some themes that we already talked about, mostly having to do with learning. But on the other hand, I think if he just had all these placements in fourth house Sagittarius and not the Virgo energies, fourth house Sagittarius to me seems almost a little bit like Pisces in the sense that it has to do with escapism, sort of. Learning indirectly from home is kind of an escape. Like he's almost more comfortable with, non-physical things, like, let's just stay in the realm of imagining and learning, dreaming, things of that nature. For him, that would be much more comfortable than the physical world. I think, these things would be even more true and more difficult if he didn't have those Virgo placements kind of holding him into reality. That's what, these Virgo placements for him are what keeps him going, okay, like we can imagine and we can dream, we can live in our heads much of the time, but he also wants to tie it back in with reality. Like, how does this fit in with the physical world? Um, so I think that's kind of a blessing, because without that, it would just be sort of untethered, just kind of floating around. Um, but those placements show that he looks like a realist. Someone with so many Sagittarius placements definitely tends to make someone very optimistic. And we talked about how, there's this connection with dreams and the other side, and it can get very, um, it can be hard to quantify things when you have so many energies like that. But the Virgo rising shows that he still wants to quantify things. He wants to be realistic. There's a little bit of cynicism that come with those placements that I think is actually a really nice balance, if that makes sense. And I hope I'm not giving you too much astrological jargon, but I believe your level of understanding is, significant enough. You'll understand what I'm saying. Okay, so what else can we talk about here? Let's get into the next part of the reading. So we're going to talk about past lives, um, what were the conditions like growing up, and also some major challenges as well. We've already kind of touched on all these things, but let's talk about the past lives, mostly signified by Virgo South Node. Okay, so this is really interesting to me. I talked about how fourth house Sagittarius and all those planets there to me suggest some level of escapism and, sort of living in your head or in imagination, learning about maybe the world, learning about real things, but indirectly, or, you know, not really truly experiencing those things. But there's, I talked also about how Southland and Virgo, he's very realistic. He wants to learn things, quantify things. Let's focus on reality. Let's not get too carried away with anything, imaginary or, like fantasy. Like he would be, at least based on his nodal placements, it looks like he would be more of a person that is more interested in nonfiction than fiction, or things that are realistic in nature. South Node in Virgo indicates someone that was very attentive to time in a past life or multiple past lives because others relied on that. So a common example would be he could have been a doctor or something else where he had to handle a lot of information very quickly in a timely manner, because other people were counting on him for things that were very significant, very important, other people's livelihoods. So that's why he carries into this life this energy of responsibility, practicality, self-sufficiency. He takes care of himself. He maybe takes care of other people as well. There's this theme of servitude with Virgo energy. And again, in a past life, he may have been someone who others depended on. So in this life, he's very dependable as well. This energy permeates into this life. It's something that's always there from day one. And you can really see this, when people are children as well. So as a child, he would have been very practical, organized, things of that manner. Okay, let's kind of segue into the challenge that comes with this, though, and then we'll go back into talking a little bit more about the childhood. So the challenge here is that when you have South Node in Virgo, especially with also, he also has ascendant in Virgo too. So these show that he's almost hyper fixated on reality. A great example is like someone with these strong Virgo energies might be obsessed with keeping track of the news and current events, and it can become a detriment. It's great to stay informed, but eventually I think there is a cost. If you're so hyper fixated on reality all the time, you'll never allow yourself to relax, especially mentally speaking. And if you never relax, you won't be able to integrate and develop your intuition. And that's where the North Node in Pisces comes in. North Node in Pisces is saying, It's okay that you are so intelligent and you're, so interested in collecting information and figuring everything out. That's awesome, but also incorporate this understanding that you're never going to know you're never going to know everything. There's always going to be a mystery. There's always going to be some level of the unknown, and it's okay just to accept that. Um, what else? Also, having North Node in Pisces suggests doing things like either relaxing, meditating, or anything spiritual in nature. It may not be natural for him, but it may be very rewarding. These things would help him kind of evolve. And I think this polarity describes a balance that he will likely deal with his whole life of, like, how do we balance learning about the world, like learning about everything, figuring everything out, being responsible, keeping track of time, but also allowing for the unknown as well. Let's, kind of, I'm picturing like letting your hands up, like releasing the reins, so to speak, or, not having control over everything. Let's just like let everything play out as it will. North Node and Pisces, it's more passive in nature, but it's more of like a spiritual kind of focus, if that makes sense. So the challenge is balancing that with being responsible and realistic. How do you find kind of a happy middle or combine the best of both worlds? You can also bring one into the other. He has such great analytical ability and great tendencies for figuring everything out. You can bring that into the spiritual realms too. Make the what do they say? Make what is not understood understood. Basically, you can apply some of those practices of figuring everything out into realms of spirituality as well. But I think ultimately the lesson though with North Node and Pisces is you don't have to figure everything out. Just accept things as they are to some extent, when it's appropriate, of course. Another thing too is South Node is in the first house. It's somewhat close to the ascendant. North Node is in the seventh house. So this means that he'd be a very self-focused person. I think this is great for increasing confidence. Having South Node near the ascendant means you're very comfortable with who you are. You know what you want. He would feel very secure with all of that, and because the ascendant and South Node are in Virgo, that's where a lot of this identity stuff and focusing on the self. It's geared toward learning and being responsible. So that's where all that really heavy. I don't want to say intense energy, but it's very focused. It's very consistent. On the other hand, North Node is in seventh house Pisces, so it looks like it's going to be much more. I shouldn't say difficult. It should be much less natural to deal with. What do other people want? How do we compromise? Um, what else? I think part of that is, you can't always, like, it's difficult enough to quantify how you are feeling, but involving another person, I think that adds more to the unknown. We never really know what other people are feeling, and so I think that's where the difficulty may come in for him, or the frustration, or at the very least, just an unfamiliarity. How do I balance my needs with someone else's without how do you compromise while still honoring your needs as well as the other person's? I think that may be a very strong challenge for him in this life. Um, and again, it's because of the unknown. The unknown looks like it's very unnatural for him. Um, so in short, these are things that will just take time. That I always say this in every reading. He likely has made a lot of progress with these things already. Age 18 is a big area of growth for most people in these areas, but this will just get easier over time. Um, the more he can relax or unwind, do things that are slow in nature, do things that boost creativity and intuition, and also work with other people, have especially like partnerships, having to work with another person, you know that could be like a romantic partnership or any kind of partnership, a business partnership. The more he can, deal with things of that nature, the more that, these are the things that will help him kind of flourish and expand. These are not things that will be innately easy, but they'll help him a lot. Um, okay, let's see. What else can I talk about here? Okay, we're still on challenges. So since we're kind of in the midst of this like darker, heavier, challenging, themes, let's talk about Saturn. So I do think it's very interesting. Saturn is in the 12th house. It's one of only two planets that were above the horizon when he was born, the other being Uranus, and both of which are very close to their horizons as well. So I don't think I've ever read a chart like that where there are no planets whatsoever that are either submerged below the horizons or the only ones that are above the horizons are right just above the horizons. So basically no planets up in the sky at all, really. I find that very interesting, and because I'm talking about it, let me just address that first before I go on to Saturn. So people say, generally speaking, that when planets are lower in the chart, they tend to make a person more private, more introverted. For him, that would very much be true because so many planets are in the fourth house, which has to do with isolation, or being at home, keeping it close, friends, close friends, family, things of that nature, or even being alone. That's what fourth house is focused on. What else? And these other areas having to do with the outer world are just not as. It's not like he has no. How do I put this? Like, just because there's no planet up in the 10th house, it doesn't mean that there's not going to be any kind of career whatsoever. We'll talk more about that in the career section, of course. But, these parts of the life are still there. It's just that they're not as natural. They're not as prevalent in the life. They're not as developed. I say we always have free will. We can work to strengthen areas of our life that may not initially be strong. It's just that it may not be as natural. It's going to be more of an uphill battle than, like, for other people it could be very different. Other people, especially other like charts of celebrities or very like famous people that I've looked at, it could be the other way around where they feel totally comfortable in the limelight and doing these like really public things, but it's the home life that's completely neglected that they can't go back to, and sometimes the home life could be very dark and uncomfortable for them. So I mean, it's all just a matter of perspective. It's different for everyone, but I guess I'm just kind of geeking out from an astrological perspective because it's just a very interesting chart. Okay, Saturn in the 12th house. I do think this is very interesting. It sort of clicks with the rest of the chart in certain ways because 12th house, like we talked about in your reading, 12th house has to do with isolation. Um, he doesn't have a large focus there like you do. You have your moon there, but um, he does have Saturn there, which shows that he may struggle with things having to do with the subconscious isolation at an early age. I think this is interesting how North Node in Pisces is saying something similar as well. It may be difficult for him to just kind of sit with his own thoughts, so to speak, or what else? Saturn's also in a Leo, which is very difficult as well. I hate, having to go from like one difficult placement to another, but I also want to be true with the information I convey. Saturn is in detriment in Leo. It's in domicile in the opposite sign Aquarius. Um, so for everyone, wherever Saturn is in your chart, it's always a place of difficulty, but some are more difficult than others. Um, Saturn in Leo is difficult because Leo represents our pride and our expression. It's an area which ideally is kind of free to just, like you can see this with people who have Sun in Leo, for example. They're just free to express themselves. They feel like everyone loves them, and it's all about them, and it's a really kind of they're just free to be themselves. Okay, and for all of us, even if we don't have Sun in Leo, we have that pride or that self-expression in one capacity or another. when someone has Saturn in Leo, it's difficult because Saturn, wherever it is, kind of constricts that, constrains it, makes it difficult. It means that we're born without that. And we have the very difficult and often painful task of creating that thing for ourselves. And that is not an easy task. It takes time. So for him, being denied that kind of self confidence or that ability to just be free and express yourself, be silly, or feel accepted and loved by just any and random, any whatever person. That is, it's very difficult, and honestly, I feel like it's very sad, to be honest. But I do say some of the most challenging Saturn placements are the most rewarding. It's just that it takes time, though. That's the challenging thing about it. So as he matures and ages, the longer he is on this earth, just experimenting and just living life, the better he will get at this. And the reason why it's more rewarding having gone through this challenge is because, eventually you become a leader. It's only by being born without something and then creating it for ourselves and being, a self-made man, so to speak. There's something truly valuable there, maybe even more so than just being given something from the beginning. Do you know what I mean? Like working hard to earn $1 million is a completely different experience than just being handed it. Earning something for yourself, you're stronger and you truly know all about that thing that you just helped to create, because you know what it's like to be without it, and you know what it takes to build it, to create it. So for him, you can already see what I'm getting at. This may take time, may be very challenging, but especially at the latest by the late 20s when the Saturn return happens, looks like he's just passing halfway there. But when Saturn comes back around to Leo, um, typically there is a very challenging experience where there's more responsibility and you have to have a sort of rite of passage, they say, in the late 20s. But then going into the 30s, having gone through that experience, we tend to be much more capable in that area. Much of this depends on free will as well as the other placements in the chart and how Saturn is situated. But basically, for him, what I'm getting at is, he may not naturally feel able to express himself, maybe not naturally proud or confident, but he's going to go through the dark and difficult task of creating these things for himself. Much of that has to do with free will, but I would say most people tend to make some pretty remarkable strides, in wherever Saturn is in their chart. And then the end, the final result is going into, later in life, 30s, 40s, 50s, especially after the late 50s, because that's where the second Saturn return happens. Then, the more time passes, we tend to really excel and eventually master the area that Saturn is in. So although he may initially not feel proud or confident or expressive, these are things that he may be extremely excellent at later in life and actually be a leader at. He may actually be able to help those, him later in life. He may be able to help those who are more like where he's at now, in order to express themselves or develop in these kind of areas. What else? Saturn, I kind of briefly touched on how Saturn is in the 12th house as well. So it's not just affecting, Leo type themes, it's also the 12th house. For him, pride and self-expression are something that come from the subconscious. It's kind of tied in with the subconscious somehow. And I mentioned how there's multiple indicators in the chart showing that it looks like it's easy for him to deal with information and facts. It's almost kind of backward, where like for him, like most people would escape into like drugs or I don't know, sleeping a lot. They escape into fantasy, but for him, it's like he actually escapes into reality. Reality like is his drag. Like let's learn about everything. So at least it is constructive. There's a lot of value in that, but that doesn't mean it's not an escape, if that makes sense. So I find that kind of interesting how that plays out, but yeah, Saturn in 12th house. It looks like initially it would be very difficult for him to just kind of relax, just accept things, just also deal with things that are spiritual in nature or kind of uncontrolled. And that looks interesting as well because there's this dichotomy of being born with some kind of connection with, well, connection with you for sure. The two of you have a very strong connection, um, but also, it looks like he has a very strong connection with psychic abilities, things of that nature. But then at the same time, there's this theme of wanting to disconnect from all that and having trouble accepting those things, I think. Okay, let's kind of move on here. So let's talk about the upbringing to some extent. Sun and Moon are almost conjunct, so this would indicate either living with just one parent, that could be a strong theme, or both the parents had a lot in common, were very similar to one another. They would have a similar parenting style. So this creates a lot of clarity for the child. So this is an easier dynamic to be born with. Well, it's easier in the sense that it creates clarity. They know what's expected of them, and so there's a inner confidence that is created from that. The difficulty for him is being born just before a new moon. That's what is so supernatural, otherworldly, daydreamy. It's the dark moon. So that there's an easy part and a difficult part that comes with being born just before a new moon like this. It could make someone difficult to understand. Others may not understand them because they are psychic, or their consciousness is different than other people's, and he may also be very empathetic as well, very sensitive. So that's difficult, but Sun and Moon conjunct, there is a confidence that comes there as well, and a clarity. Like he knows what's expected of him growing up. What else could I say? The IC also indicates, a person's, what they were like as a child. And for him, IC is in Scorpio. So typically, those born with IC and Scorpio grow up in environments that are a bit chaotic. And so they actually, like, okay, how do I put this? I think the more normal, like the view that is more expected that we have of growing up is, a kid grows up in an orderly environment and they rebel by, being chaotic or destructive. For someone born with IC and Scorpio, it's almost the other way around. They grow up in an environment that is chaotic, and so their way of rebelling is actually by creating order. They want structure. They want to build things. They want to construct things. So in a way, that's their form of rebellion. So, and then combining that with these other placements in his chart, it looks like it's almost like there's this focus on the non-physical and detaching, and again, it's like he wants to just run away from all that and let's focus on reality. Let's be factual. Let's learn about things. Let's build things. And again, I'm not judging that. There is, at least it's constructive in nature and not chaotic or destructive. For sure, there can be a lot of strengths in that, but it can still be a form of escapism or a form of rebellion as well. And that's where I don't know, very interesting stuff, very kind of deep and I would say dark kind of stuff there going on. Um, okay, let's talk about the more professional side of things. I just kind of chuckle because this is such an interesting chart, so I'm not sure how this is going to go exactly. Midheaven is in Taurus, so that is, I would say, one of the strongest midheavens to have. And midheaven represents, how one is professionally and in public. And in Taurus, this is really excellent because, being born with an Earth midheaven means that you come across as hardworking, responsible, consistent. You don't just come across that way; you are that way as well, in public and at work. But midheaven in Taurus specifically, it's ruled by Venus, and so there's this kind of charisma that comes with this placement as well. There is, someone who comes across and has a reputation as not only being hardworking, reliable, consistent, etc., but also charismatic, also being, fun and easy to be around. So again, I would say this is really one of the best placements to have in terms of public and career, reputation, things of that nature. It does make it difficult for me as an astrologer to say exactly what someone should do for work, though, because with midheaven and Taurus, there's a wide, you could use that in many different ways. Really, I think you could be in almost any industry. Um, Let's look to the other placements going on here, though. So the first thing that strikes me when it comes to thinking about what kind of strengths he might have for a place of work, or what he might need from a place of work, there's this huge focus on learning that we already talked about. And I think he has an ability to combine learning about facts and data with a more psychic or more intuitive sense as well, or intelligence, I guess would be a better word. So some kind of position that demands a lot of understanding, that demands maybe seeing patterns in large amounts of data, or dealing with very complex topics. Um, Something like that would be excellent for him. Another thing, though, is there is so much going on in the fourth house that it just looks like he's going to always be the most comfortable at home. That's what I would kind of speculate anyway. So these days there are many different positions you can do from home. So maybe if we were to combine both of those, if he could have something that involved learning, researching, teaching from home, I think that could be very possible. I think that would check a lot of boxes. That's the main thing I see. Those are the main, like, really dominant themes, I think, that are overarching, and that would really apply to professional work. Um, Very intelligent, very much more comfortable at home, and then there's that really kind of strong reputation as well, strong image, or um, so some teaching, reading, writing, teaching, maybe being like an author would be a great one. That that would check all those boxes. Writer, editor, teacher, professor. Um, what else? Something like that, or I don't know, or I feel like I almost don't. I wouldn't even know what these kind of positions, like positions that deal with. I don't know, like something where he would go really far into a subject. Like, for instance, I'd speculate he probably has a couple subjects that he is like a master at. He knows everything about it. So I don't know whether that would be like math or philosophy or whatever it is, but whatever it is, like, I could just see him going super far in that direction and being, an expert in that area. Maybe, and that's where he could be like a teacher or something of that nature. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of what I see, or that's how I interpret these things, I think. Okay, let's go on to the relationship part of this reading. So, what would he be attracted to in another person? What kind of signs would be best for him? And how do I see the kind of ideal relationship playing out for him? Okay, so I look to, of course, Venus, Mars, and the descendant more than anything. Of course, the other placements are important too, but for retraction and long term compatibility, mostly Venus, Mars, and the descendant, you can see a lot. So for him, he has Mars in Sagittarius, and throughout this whole reading, I haven't even mentioned his Venus in fifth house Capricorn yet, too. Um, let's see. So I think Venus is actually a little bit more important than Mars. Venus shows what he's attracted to in another person, as well as his approach to relationships. Um, Venus is in Capricorn, so in its most literal interpretation, it would show an attraction toward people that are like Capricorn or have heavy placements in Capricorn. So people that are structured, he has Virgo rising and Virgo south node as well. So this shows that he's really comfortable with people that are straightforward, factual, logical. I think especially early in life, people who are too emotional or too, impractical would just be a complete turnoff for him, because he's attracted toward things and people that can be kind of quantified, and things that are linear, things that are factual in nature. Um, okay, so yeah, basically people like Capricorn, also people who are very self-sufficient, um, who are experienced in some way. Uh, those with Venus and Capricorn, their idea of romance is all about the long term. So he would want someone he can really settle down with, someone he can really rely on, someone who has their shit together, so to speak. Um, someone who, they're experienced. They may be either older or just very responsible, very mature, if that makes sense. So Capricorn would of course fit in with all this. Virgo would as well. People who have strong Virgo placements would be sort of like there'd be an easy friendship there. He would relate with them because he has Virgo rising and Virgo south node. Also, with all his Sagittarius placements, they're focused on learning and they're very open and adaptable. Virgo is open, adaptable, and focused on learning as well. There would be kind of a clash there, but that doesn't have to be bad though. I think oftentimes there are many friendships between Virgo and Sagittarius people. Um, it's almost like when you have signs that square one another, it's like they do disagree oftentimes, but they speak the same language, so they still understand each other. They respect each other. They may disagree, but those disagreements can actually enrich the relationship. They don't have to be a source of contention. So right off the bat, Virgo and Capricorn are huge signs of compatibility for sure. Taurus to a lesser extent as well. Taurus will be earthy, practical, straightforward. So that will kind of fit in. It's similar to Virgo or Capricorn, but it doesn't strike me as strongly as Capricorn or Virgo do. But really, Earth signs in general could be great friends for him. Could be more than that. Could be lovers, things of that nature for sure. Oh, one other thing about that too. So with Venus and Capricorn, it tends to relate to a person having kind of a slow, steady approach to relationships. So, so Earth signs, someone who is, has many Earth signs in their chart, they're going to be slow and steady in general, very routine uh, oriented, and so they will naturally, understand and reciprocate his kind of more steady approach to relationships. So Earth signs really a lot of compatibility with for sure. Okay, and then Mars is in Sagittarius along with, most of the other planets. I still can't get over just how many planets are there. That's pretty crazy. But Mars in Sagittarius, so that shows other well, other individuals who have Sagittarius energies. Of course, he's going to relate to a lot. No chart I've ever seen has more Sagittarius planets than his. So, you know, like in some sense, if you I'm speaking figuratively, of course, but if you were to look up Sagittarius in the dictionary, like he would be kind of an archetypal, like Sagittarius in the flesh, so to speak. Um, and maybe I'll talk more about that in the outro, in the closing part of this reading. But anyway, so someone who has Sagittarius energies, or Sagittarius placements, like Sagittarius Sun or Moon or what have you, he will of course relate to them. They'll have a lot in common. They could be great friends. Um, but because Mars is there, it does show like a potential sexual attraction. Of course, there's not going to be sexual chemistry with every person who has Sagittarius placements, but there could be a kind of a healthy competitiveness, a kind of edgy energy, and potentially sexual compatibility as well. That mostly applies to Sagittarius. Could also apply to Leo or Aries to a lesser extent. Leo is going to be a little bit different because Saturn is there. So Leo people may be initially not as attractive to him, but especially a little bit later in life, they may, Leos are going to be kind of like teachers for him, or people that, I don't know, lessons come to him from Leos. So definitely not the most fun sign for him to be around, but it could be important or meaningful. But I do think that would kind of shut down a lot of the like sexual chemistry that would otherwise be in Leo. Aries, there could be some attraction there. It does definitely clash with Virgo and with Capricorn to some extent, but it would at least try in all his Sagittarius placements, including Mars. So there could be some attraction with Aries. More so than Leo, but not as much as Sagittarius. So far we've got Virgo, Capricorn, and Sagittarius would be major signs of attraction, not just romantically, but friendship-wise as well. Okay, but let's talk about the descendant. So here the descendant is in Pisces, and that's where things get kind of interesting for me at least. So, okay, so because he has Virgo rising with Pisces descendant, this shows to me in a relationship that he would likely be the responsible one. He's the practical one. He is Virgo in the relationship, so he is the one that is, he's the intelligent one. It looks like, a chart of an extremely intelligent person, if I'm being honest. So looks like he's the one that's got all the facts figured out. He's got he does the planning, he figures out the dates, he keeps track of the resources, for him and his significant other. Um, he is the rock, so to speak. Like oftentimes in these charts, I see one person who is the rock, and then one person who is the dreamer and the imaginative one. He would easily be the realist. He's the rock. He would be more attracted to someone that is more like Pisces, so someone more dreamy, more emotional, especially someone who wears their heart on their sleeves, who's emotionally, what's the word, like expressive, I guess you could say. What else? Also, someone who's not very structured, who's kind of just, they're here, they're there, they're exploring, they're meandering around. Maybe this is coming to me intuitively, I'm not sure, but I think this would be very difficult for him early in life. Early in life, we tend to attract relationships with people that are more similar to ourselves because we're still learning about ourselves. I think this would especially be true for him because because he has South Node in Virgo. Pisces is like it's the other for him, and it's not just Pisces, but it's what that represents. It's people who are emotional or people who are confident in being emotionally vulnerable or illogical. Um, People who are impulsive and spontaneous and adventurous. All of that, I think, at least early in life, would be unappealing for him. It's just, he would have to become very, very developed in himself. It would take time to get there before being open to such a different energy, if that makes sense. But once he is open to that, he could, there would be really strong potential for benefits that would come from that area. So, for example, if he were to be in a relationship with someone who was, had strong Pisces energy, maybe strong placements there, Sun, Moon, Rising, Venus, Mars, etc., or even, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone who has Pisces placements, but someone who just is like the Pisces sign. So, someone all dreamy, imaginative, emotional, etc. That would kind of help him to unlock part of himself. That would help him to expand really dramatically because it's not just the descendant in Pisces there. Descendant in Pisces shows that the best kind of partner for him, romantic or otherwise, would be Pisces. But it's not just the descendant there. There's Uranus and North Node as well. So both of those are indicating the more he works with Pisces energy or people that are like Pisces, the more he works with that energy, the more he will evolve, expand, and because Uranus is there, he could have some pretty significant shifts in perception as well. And I think these would be very interesting to him because we already covered the rest of it. Well, we already covered many other factors in his chart showing that he's focused on learning. He wants to understand things. And so connecting with this other way of looking at things and having potentially some really profound epiphanies or huge shifts in thinking and awareness, that I think that would be very tantalizing for him, very interesting. And again, those could come from a relationship with someone who maybe has a lot of water in their chart or Pisces energy. I do think Pisces specifically would be interesting for him, or attractive, I should say, because Pisces, like Virgo, it does square Sagittarius. So again, it's that kind of dynamic where Pisces people, someone who has a lot of Pisces energy may disagree with him oftentimes, but it's in a way that is, both of them will understand each other very readily. Excuse me, and they may respect each other. And again, that kind of disagreement, it's not necessarily all bad. It could create some edginess. That's where things can actually get, I think, a little bit. There could be kind of like an opposites attract, or like almost like a sexual chemistry there from that little bit of edginess, if that makes sense. What else here can I talk about? Yeah, so I think Pisces, not only is that kind of an opposites attract sign for him, but there's enough in common there that I don't think it would be entirely what's the word, unsustainable. Like sometimes if you deal with a person who's so different from you, like we talked about in your reading, um, it's difficult to sustain. I think Pisces would be kind of that happy medium of different enough to really make things interesting and bring out this other side of reality, but similar enough to be sustainable potentially for a long term. Okay, so in short, that was a really kind of interesting one to unpack for sure. But Pisces definitely, the descendant is there, so that does show strong potential with Pisces. Looking at the other water signs, I can't help but to think that there's a much less level of potential there. Um, let's see. So he does lack water signs in his chart, kind of like your chart as well, which is interesting. But as you know, when we lack water in our charts, we're not as comfortable with really sappy displays of emotion, especially from people we don't know very well. Um, what else? I mean, I think that's the main part. So someone who's very emotional, dreamy, creative, artsy, maybe. If he's feeling whole within himself, and he's at that point of maturity, and that other person is too, this could be helped by other placements in the chart that they may have in common as well. But if the conditions are right, it could be very attractive. But if someone, let's say, just has a lot of Scorpio placements and Cancer placements, these really, I don't think, fit into his chart very well. Yes, they are similar to Pisces, but they are. I think Cancer and Scorpio, even more so than Pisces, are just so intensely emotional. Pisces is at least willing to adapt to some extent, and I think they can be more detached than Cancer or Scorpio. But Cancer and Scorpio are just, they feel what they feel so strongly that they almost are blind to everything else. And I think for him, that would be very confusing. I think early in life, it would be a complete turnoff. They really clash with Sagittarius, and, um, you know, because he has so many placements in Sagittarius, he wants the truth. He wants to be, he can be very bold and blunt in his communication, I think, because, if it's the truth, then that's what it is. There's no, you know, I think he's just more oriented toward things that are objective rather than subjective, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure how exactly to put it into words, but Cancer and Scorpio, I really feel, especially early in life, it just wouldn't really work. Pisces, there's some really strong potential there, but even that I would think would take time. I could be wrong, but I think that would take time to get to. Okay, so we covered earth, fire, water. Last would be air signs. He actually has almost no planets in air whatsoever. There's just Neptune in Aquarius. So as we talked about in your reading, and I'm just realizing both of you really lack air and water, which is pretty interesting. There's clearly a very strong connection between the two of you, but okay, but he lacks air signs in his chart. So again, like I talked about in your reading, air signs are going to be potentially very almost like disgusting to him, but also very attractive. They're a turnoff in the sense that he just wouldn't relate to them. They have basically nothing in common. Air signs are so detached; they don't take anything seriously. They're kind of just wandering around. They're kind of directionless, structureless. We talked about how he wants structure. And he's very passionate about learning things. He likes things that are concrete. With air signs, nothing is concrete. So it's going to be difficult at first hand value, but also, especially for long-term close relationships, very difficult because there would have to be a lot of compromise and a lot of mutual understanding. On the other hand, when you lack an element, you can be attracted to it because it's the other, it's exotic, it's different, something new that you don't have, and it can be mutually beneficial. Air signs can show him not to take everything too seriously, detach a little bit, and he can show them, get some structure to you. Let's be realistic here, things like that. So it could be mutually beneficial, but also difficult to sustain. Okay, okay, that's what I have for the reading. There are a couple things I wanted to talk about in the close here. So one, I did want to talk a little bit more about the lack of air. When someone lacks air, um, things can feel very heavy when there are no air placements, and very strict and serious, so that can be difficult. I just wanted to throw that out there. Same with, when we lack water in our charts, it's difficult to connect with emotion. And so it can be sometimes difficult to meet other people if you don't have water in your chart, because other people can't sense the emotion in you as readily, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to mention that, these are more examples, I think, of how his chart is so focused. I think it's charts like these that you can get really interesting people in history, or pivotal people, because it's so extreme. The Like, for instance, like, this chart is not of a well-rounded person. What he's There are intense strengths and intense challenges, I would say. Of course, that's a huge generalization, but I think it's when how do I say this? I think it's when it's in conditions like those that you get people who have those really intense strengths, or contributions to society. Um, in other words, I think most of the most influential people in history were not well rounded. They went all or nothing into one thing, into one ability or one subject. And that's what we know them for. So, this chart strikes me as someone like that, if that makes sense. What else did I want to talk about? Again, I wanted to mention the connection between the two of you. Um, Both of you have major placements conjunct the galactic center. Both of you have, I think it's only one or no planets in air and water. I would have to look at your chart again, but so both of you have almost all your planets in fire and earth, and you have this connection to the galactic center. So obviously this isn't like a sinister reading, so I don't want to delve too much into that, but I did think it was really interesting that the two of you have an undeniable connection. When I saw this connection with the galactic center, the first thing I thought of was that, not only do you share this kind of psychic connection, but, you may have had, I would think you've had past lives together, that you have some kind of history that is beyond this life. That's the first thing I thought of. Um, what else could I talk about? Oh, okay. Two more things. So his Mercury is in Sagittarius. Mercury's in detriment in Sagittarius. Um, this isn't unusual. I'd say 1 out of 12 people have Mercury in Sagittarius, but this means that the way he communicates may be a little bit unusual, or the way he learns may be unusual, but also the topics he's attracted to would be unusual. So he would be naturally interested in issues having to do with countercultures, occult information, maybe. Although, on the other hand, the Virgo placements might steer him away from that too. It's hard to tell. He wants things that are factual. He wants to know the correct answer. He looks like someone who might like Google things frequently. But Mercury in Sagittarius is typically interested in learning, the other side to things, like the less popular narrative or opinion, so to speak, things like that. So I thought that was really interesting, and it's particularly relevant because his chart is so focused on learning, and Mercury is his chart ruler too. So in some capacities, Mercury is the most important planet in his chart, and it's showing it's showing one of the most important things for him is learning, and the way he learns is unusual. He does it on his own. He's an independent thinker, and what he's learning about is very interesting too. It's not necessarily what's taught in schools. It's not the mainstream narrative, so to speak. Okay, one last thing before I wrap this up. Um, Actually, two more things. So about compatibility, Uranus is in the seventh house as well. I could have mentioned that. So this would mean that he'd be attracted toward people that are very eccentric, people that are very unique. They may have unique ways of presenting themselves, like very unique appearance or mannerisms, um, things of that nature. So just wanted to throw that out there. It could have to do with people who have Aquarius placements as well. Um, that is an air sign, so that may be difficult long term. But just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, and then one final little kind of tidbit here. So Saturn is retrograde and it's in the 12th house. I just wanted to show that he has multiple indicators showing an absent father, not just Sun in fourth house, but also Saturn retrograde is another one. Saturn in 12th house is a third indicator for absent father as well. So I don't know what you would do with that information, but that's a strong probability, I guess. Um, okay, if I'm being completely honest, this was this was a particularly interesting but also challenging one for me. So I am really grateful for these readings. You know, your chart was particularly interesting to me as well. But yeah, his, if I were to kind of, I don't know, sum this up a little bit, it looks like he was dealt a very difficult hand, but a very interesting hand. Like a difficult hand, but one that would result in a very, interesting and unusual game for him, I think, especially with the way he plays it. Um, it does look difficult, but I think he has something really special maybe to offer this world. I can't say exactly what it is, but it has to do with, that psychic awareness and the intelligence as well, and the combination of both of those. It looks like something really powerful and really unique. Okay, but that's what I see for this chart reading. So I hope you find that interesting or helpful, and I'll talk to you later.